Well, it's been a busy news week in politics. Former South African Airways chairperson Dudu Myeni finally made an appearance before the Pretoria High Court yesterday. Myeni had been excusing herself from a delinquency application that was brought against her by the organisation Undoing Tax Abuse, OUTA, and the South African Airways Pilots Association, SAPA. Now, she's denied all allegations against her and says that she never discussed SAA matters with then President Jacob Zuma. Also, members of Parliament debated President Cyril Ramaphosa's recent State of the Nation address, and the President gave his response. And the proceedings, however, were continuously disrupted. And to discuss these stories and others that made headlines this week, we're joined now by political analyst Herald Pakendorf. Thanks so much for coming through.
Morning.
It's been an interesting week. So what has stood out for you?
I think the Dudu Myeni story is the important one. She was a high flyer. She was important in the Zuma era. She heads the Jacob Zuma Trust. She heads a water authority in KwaZulu-Natal, and then SAA. And there have always been rumors about her and possible wrongdoings. And what you've mentioned are the accusations in court, which, by the way, she only attended once so far. I find that odd that you can not go to court when you're an accused. But there was a much more serious allegation before the Zondo Commission about money laundering and huge sums, 3 million rand, which, according to a witness, has flown to her and to the Jacob Zuma Trust. I think that's the more serious one, and I would hope that at least would catch the attention of the National Prosecuting Authority.
Well, speaking of catching the attention of the National Prosecuting Authority, there's a lot that has gone before even the Dudu Myeni revelations. Has it caught their attention? Because I think part of what people are beginning to feel a bit disgruntled about is that we're not seeing as much action as perhaps the broader public would like to see. Is the public perhaps misplaced in their expectations in this regard?
No, I don't think so. But remember the background. We had to bring in the President had to bring in a new public prosecutor and brought in somebody specially to look after these kind of cases. And they've just really started working. They rehired people. So it's a slow process. You're absolutely right. Unfortunately, one can easily get the impression that you can get away with corruption and stealing money and doing with the public purse what you want to.
And I'm going to come back to that in just a moment, but I also want to highlight the fact that it would seem as though these politically motivated cases always, seem to get priority when it comes to the NPA. The case of the TRC files. And we are still waiting for the NPA to act. We have the Neil Agate inquest currently underway. There was the Ahmed Timol inquest. The Noktula Simelane inquest will happen in October. And then there are other families, the Bikos, the Craddock 4 families. All of these families still waiting. The TRC was very clear that where amnesty was not granted, those cases that were handed over to the NPA, I think it's 20, however many years now, they still haven't seen the light of day. What are we to make of that?
Well, it's 22 years to be exact.
22 years,
yeah.
Yes.
I don't have an explanation. At the back of my mind, I think there must be some political thing going on somewhere. Why would anybody want to defend people who were thus accused, not being found guilty yet? And I have no explanation for it, except that possibly that the NPA has so much to do that this is not a priority. But I think it will now become one, with the Agate case being such a big one.
But why wouldn't it be a priority?
Well, I think initially there was a tendency not to do anything, just to stir. Now, 22 years afterwards, that explanation doesn't cut any ice at all. I really don't understand why not.
So coming back to the Dudu Myeni case, and she finally made her appearance. And as you say, she, of course, has been implicated severally on several platforms.
Yeah.
And appearing in the Pretoria High Court yesterday, she said that, firstly, she did not discuss these matters relating to what was happening at SAA with then former President Jacob Zuma, because there's also, of course, there needs to be a link established between her and Jacob Zuma in order to also make the cases stick that you spoke about, the allegations that were leveled at the Zondo Commission.
Well, being before the Zondo Commission is different from being in court. The process takes a little longer. The problem she faces is that more than one person has said there was money laundering, this is the process. I, in fact, took the money to her house at such and such an address and hid the money and then phoned her and told her where the money is. To prove that in court is a little more difficult than to do that before making an allegation in front of the Zondo Commission. But it's not been a good week for her.
No, it certainly hasn't. And just this delinquency case that she faces in the Pretoria High Court, you know, those allegations that are leveled against her for what she allegedly did to render SAA as incapacitated as it is at the moment, do you think that others should have been dragged before that court alongside her?
You know, even if you're a powerful chairperson of a board, you cannot be held responsible on your own. I mean, where was the rest of the board? Shouldn't somebody have stood up and said, no, we can't do it this way? Except that the phone calls that she made were of course, on her own, that she allegedly made, although two people in court said that she had, in fact, said this is what Jacob Zuma wants. So it's two words against hers, difficult to say. But you make a very good point, and it goes beyond the SAA. I think in all private companies and state companies, there is always a board, and why should the board as such not be held responsible? So we changed the board, but we do nothing about the delinquent ones that we got rid of.
And it raises a few other issues around boards of directors and exactly what their responsibilities and accountabilities are. And also the fact that something that has been raised but perhaps not as loudly as it should, and that is that you see people sitting on several boards. The same people seem to be recycled over and over again. You talk of Dudu Myeni, sits on the board of SAA, sits on the board of Umhlatuzi Water, those sort of things. What should be done about that?
First of all, it must be difficult to get capable people. But secondly, in the SOEs, unfortunately, it's very important that you, in many cases, are politically connected. I think a rank outsider, even if he's absolutely brilliant, won't easily make it unless you know somebody. So that explains part of the reason why people are recycled. Not enough people, and the same pool is reused again and again. But you make a good point. I think we should search wider and give more people the opportunity, and also make it absolutely clear that there should be consequences for what you do as a board member. And unfortunately, there aren't.
Indeed, at least it would seem that way on the face of it. And as you say, it shouldn't just be Dudu Myeni. Absolutely, she should be there and held accountable for what she did, her role. But where are all the others? But then one could argue perhaps that this is a good starting point to perhaps, you know, pave the way for bringing others before the courts and having them declared delinquent.
Well, there is one difference here. This is not the NPA. This is a privately brought case against her. And one would have liked the NPA to have done this. And they might still do it, because being declared a delinquent director means you can't serve on a board more. But that's not criminal. So, and what she's been alleged to have done is, of course, criminal. Money laundering, huge stacks of hundreds of thousands of rand in cash dumped in your house. I think the NPA can actually do something about that. And I don't think you have to wait for the end of the Zondo Commission.
So it also highlights a few other interesting things that were revealed yesterday by Dudu Myeni herself. The sale of the SAA fleet and then the leasing of the very same fleet for which Coleman Andrews, she says, was paid 200 million rand.
I think 287.
Yeah. So what are we to make of that? Shouldn't we look into what is going on there?
Well, certainly. I mean, Coleman Andrews just went when he was at the SAA. It was a fairly well-run organization. Not because of him, he got a fairly well-running organization, and he left. And there were huge questions, particularly about this. I don't think he got the money. It was a golden handshake. I don't think that it was involved in that deal directly.
But still,
oh no!
I mean, just
but
at
the whole
face
question.
value, you sell a fleet and then you lease the very same fleet that you sold. That sounds all sorts of questionable and dodgy.
No, certainly it should be looked into. But you know, talking about golden handshakes, it's really a sickness in our society that if you want to get rid of somebody who's either useless or crooked, we give him money to go away instead of taking him to court. If you get a golden handshake, say please leave the organization. That surely should not be acceptable.
So also, you know, when you talk about golden handshakes, and we've seen this even with the former NDPP. So this is something that is also pervasive, and it speaks once again to the monies that simply just are doled out at will from our state coffers. At what point do we turn around and say it's not just enough to hold these people before the courts or do what they need to return the money to the state coffers?
Absolutely, yes. Oh, absolutely. That certainly should be part of it. Return the money and then go to jail.
So why aren't we seeing that? Why isn't it happening, given the exorbitant amounts of money that we have lost as a country?
And they are exorbitant. I mean, for ordinary people like us, you can't wrap your mind around the kind of money that people so casually take and get and are given. I really don't know. I mean, there's no explanation for it except once we start, and remember we had 9 years of a lot of dereliction of duty. So we have to get ourselves out of that anyway. But I suspect once we start a proper case against the real politician, not fringe people, then we'll begin to see the ball rolling in the way.
Is that ever going to happen, though?
I do think so, you know. And I think once the first one goes to jail, whoever it is, let's not speculate, that'll send a clear message. Cyril Ramaphosa's side, not he himself, but his side is in charge. It's no good being on the other side. You can't run away anymore. Better to come forward and be kind to the Cyril Ramaphosa side. It'll be really politically important.
Isn't that problematic, what you just said? The Cyril Ramaphosa side. Because what does that mean? What is the Cyril Ramaphosa side? And what gives them the moral high ground?
Well, the Cyril Ramaphosa side is purely a political expression. That has nothing to do with the state. But then, of course, and he heads a political party, he heads the country. In his political party, which, by the way, will not be running South Africa forever and a day. I mean, people mustn't think that that's written in heaven or in hell. It'll change. All these things change. And it's good if you're into politics to begin to remember that. But this party is deeply divided. And that's not speculation, that's not analyzing, that's just a fact. If you just look at who went to the Public Protector's 50th birthday, I mean, the Public Protector is clearly hunting Cyril Ramaphosa and anybody around him. And then trusted member of the ANC.
How do we back that up? Because when you make that statement, you need to be able to back it up. When you say the Public Protector is hunting Cyril Ramaphosa, how so?
All the cases that she's been involved in, the cases that get public attention are certainly aimed at Cyril Ramaphosa. And in too many cases, the courts have found that there was no legal right to do it. And well, she might lose her job anyway, depending on how deeply divided the ANC is. there's another test coming for you.
Indeed it is.
Yeah.
But, you know, there's so much to talk about, but unfortunately we're out of time, so we're going to have to leave it there. But we didn't even talk about the State of the Nation address, but more analysis coming up here on Morning Live, and I'm sure Leanne will touch on that. But that was Herald Pakendorf, political analyst, talking to us about, in the main, what happened during Dudu Myeni's delinquency case that is currently underway at the Pretoria High Court. Let's take a break.